So I'm going to keep this fast. Daniel Kraft's style is speed. So hopefully I'll share a lot of things with you that'll be thought-provoking and fun as well. But it's going to come nice and quick and get you all out there for dinner. It's so great to give a talk after hearing something that's so inspiring and exactly in the line of sight of what I've been thinking about my entire career. And that's why I'm going to put up just this nice, broad, simple goal of improving quality of life. And we just heard a great story about the struggle to improve quality of life when you have damage to your brain. And many of my colleagues, brilliant, are focused on us living longer. And I think that's great. But if we're not living better, then I think that we're missing a real underlying fundamental of what it means to be alive. And so I'm very focused on this aspect of how do we live longer, but also better. And the challenge that I feel is global is how do we develop approaches to enhance our cognitive abilities, both when we're healthy, in which case it's essentially the core mission, or should be, of the education system, right? Not just the transfer of content, but improving how young brains and throughout life process information. And from the impaired point of view, it's the core of the entire mental health care system, from all the neurological and psychiatric diseases that have information processing disorders. So how do we go about this? We know that the win is so great if we can accomplish this. I want to first tell you where I think we are now, and that's a sort of sad story of being a neurologist, but I'm going to give you sort of the state of the art, even at the top medical centers around the world, if you present, and this is just one example. I think this applies pretty much to any neurological psychiatric disease that impairs cognitive abilities. So in this particular example, the type of patient that I'd see, a 60-year-old complaining with attention and memory problems. And I have this picture up here. If you're not familiar with what this is the frustration of arriving at the refrigerator only to find that you have no idea what you're doing there when you knew 7 seconds earlier. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? So, if this happens, you shouldn't be overly concerned. This happens to everyone. But if it happens again and again, you have a family history of Alzheimer's disease, more concerning forgetfulness happens, you might find yourself at a physician's office. And if you do, this is what's going to happen. The first thing is that you're going to likely get a very poor characterization of what's really going on in your brain to lead to this troublesome behavior that got you there in the first place. Although we've had decades of functional brain imaging, you're unlikely going to get any of that translates into your care. If it's concerning enough, we will treat you, though, and this is largely the way that we treat you, right? We give you a pill. The problem with it is that pretty much all of our medications for all the host of diseases of the brain that affect cognition, and include emotional processing in cognition, are poorly targeted. So they might act generally on a neurotransmitter system, but they're not going to act on the fundamental computational unit of the brain, which is the neural network. And because of that, we get other effects besides the effects that we're trying to get, and we call those side effects. And physicians spend a good part of their career treating those side effects that are caused by the very therapeutics that we give in the first place. So that's another problem. The other big problem is that it's entirely non-personalized, right? The prescriptive advice is based on data from a large population, not taking into account the heterogeneity of that population and the individual differences. So this might not even be appropriate for how this person's brain is working. And it's often unimodal, right? So even though we know that there are many things that are good for brain health, like physical exercise, very frequently a single siloed approach to how we treat is what occurs, like a single pill. The last problem is that our system is open loop. And by that, it's actually easy for me to tell you what a closed loop system is, and many of you probably do already. You intervene in some way, you record the impact, and based on that data, you reapply with as short a time interval, as low latency as possible. And this type of closed feedback loop is how you change any system. It's really the opposite of how our current system works, right? You take a medication home, you subjectively look at your own side effects, and you come back maybe months later, report it to the doctor, and then a non-empirically based decision is usually reached and going up or down, and you begin this very open cycle. Not a powerful way to change any system. And I would say that this is just not good enough. Now, I don't feel that strongly negative against all molecular approaches to improving the brain. I mean, many of my colleagues are trying to work on cures to things like Alzheimer's disease, and I hope that happens. But right now, the medications that we have, because of these issues, are really not good enough, not where we should be. And if we had more time, I'd tell you that I think a lot of these same problems are also there for our education system, right across the list. But let's move on. So how do you create a new system? So this is the approach that my lab has been working on, trying to create for over 10 years now, something that's targeted, personalized, multimodal, closed loop, filling all the gaps that we currently experience in our system. So how do you go about building a new approach like this? Well, step one is to understand what the target is. If you don't know what the target is, it's hard to be targeted. And so we use a number of approaches, often in single experiments: functional MRI, electroencephalography, transcranial stimulation, both magnetic and electrical, to understand how neural networks underlie higher order cognitive behaviors. And then, what are the vulnerabilities in our processing systems? Where are the areas that we can act on? What happens when we get older, which is what a lot of my research focused on. So we start building not just an understanding of the system, but functional biomarkers to be able to look and detect change when we try to issue that to a patient or any population. Once we have the target, our goal is to build an engine of change. So all engines need fuel, and our fuel in our lab is neuroplasticity, right? The ability of our brain to modify itself at every level, from structure to function, chemistry, in response to new experiences. And because of brain plasticity, we think that we can make an impact in improving how our brain functions. So we're not creating this, we're just harnessing brain plasticity that already exists. So how do we take advantage of our brain plasticity, which we now know exists throughout our entire lives, in order to improve cognition? So there's an entire landscape that I first plotted out almost 7 years ago before I started doing the work I'm going to tell you about now, to figure out what are all the possibilities. We don't have really time to go through all these now, but all of these can and should be thought of as ways of enhancing our cognitive abilities. But I want to tell you about one that's become dear to my heart recently, and that's video games. So many of you probably play video games. You certainly know about them. You might not know that it's pretty much 50-50 gender balance now. It's fully global. The average age of a gamer is approaching 40, and not just young gamers like myself becoming older, but games are being targeted to many different populations. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, clearly a powerful influencer of behavior. But can games have a positive impact? Many people question that. And I've actually found this interesting quote from the 80s. Video games are just another manifestation of human mania, our enduring quality of going relentlessly after absolutely pointless goals. That's Time magazine, 1982, so the early days. But I can tell you that not everyone feels this way, certainly not anymore. There was a literature that started in 2003 by colleagues of mine, Sean Green, Daphne Beverley, and what they found was that these games, some of the games that people actually feel the most strong negative feelings about, first-person shooter, action video games, improve the cognitive abilities of those young folks that play them when you test them in the lab. And there's cognitive control abilities, like processing speed, attention, distraction resistance, task switching. And when you take naive young adults that have never played these games, usually almost only girls, and then have them play it, you see some of these same effects when you compare it to other games like Tetris. And so we were inspired by this, that there must be active ingredients here. We didn't think that that active ingredients was violence, but it's actually still an open-ended question. But we asked, can we build a customized game to improve cognitive control abilities, those same abilities I just mentioned, in older adults, because our lab had been showing that they have very distinct deficits in those domains. And so I reached out to friends of mine that worked in the video game industry. They were pretty senior game developers at LucasArts, which unfortunately is no longer with us. And they were just friends of mine. And I said, hey, can you come down to the lab? I came up with an idea of a game that's based on our research on the type of abilities that we know older adults have a lot of trouble with. But my lab doesn't know how to build a video game. We want to build something immersive. We have a lot of ideas about the active ingredients that we want in this. Can you come down and help us build? And fortunately, they felt that they've been teaching teenagers how to kill aliens their entire lives, and that the opportunity to do something with positive impact was really interesting to them. So they came down to my lab. We had a whole team of engineers, artists, musicians, storytellers, interacting with my students and my postdocs, and we built the game. It took us around a year. I'm just going to give you a quick look at NeuroRacer. And so what you do in NeuroRacer, you drive a car on a road. You have to maintain the car using a joystick in all directions, so up the hill, give it gas, left, right. These signs come up, green circles. You have to respond as rapidly and accurately to target signs and ignore distracting signs like red circles or these green pentagons. Very hard not to press for them. What's under the hood here is that both of these tasks use adaptive algorithms, meaning that they challenge you right at the level of your ability, detecting your ability in real time and then adjusting the challenge to scale appropriately to you. We then take these adaptive algorithms, so both those tasks have independent algorithms, and, well, if you were playing this game, what you would do, whether or not you did it on purpose, is that you'd get better at one of these things and let the other fall off. Your brain doesn't do very well with this type of simultaneous parallel processing on two tasks that demand attention. But what we do is we couple across the adaptive loops with reward cycles. So essentially, you don't level up in this game if you don't get better at both these tasks. And everyone likes leveling up, even 80-year-olds that come into our lab. So we take advantage of that human drive to improve and built the game this way. And then we did a series of studies over the 4 years that followed. So the game took us a year, then 4 years of research using the game in so many different ways. I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot of some of that. We could look at the game to see behaviorally how you perform, neurally how you perform, and then see if we could use the game as a therapeutic intervention to improve not just your skills to multitask in a distracting environment, but other aspects of cognitive control like attention and memory that we know are related to those skills. So let me show you about the game as a behavioral diagnostic. So multitasking performance, a 0% means that you do as well on the sign task when you do it alone compared to when you're driving at the same time. And so you could see we have on the x-axis decades of life, and if we have 20-year-olds, I don't know if there's any 20-year-olds in the room, but I lecture a lot, and if you ask 20-year-olds how they will do on this, they think that they will have a 0% because they believe they are multitasking masters. And so they play the game, you record that differential, and what we find is that they're not, right? They have a 27% drop in performance when they try to simultaneously engage in these two tasks. Now, we already know that 70-year-olds are going to be impaired on this because we've been studying this for a decade and have dozens of publications. But what happens in between, right? Do you just retain these abilities and then plummet in one horrible year when you're 69? That's not what happens. This is what happens. You plunge every year. So this is a rather linear change across life. Interestingly enough, the biggest difference between two adjacent decades are between 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. So this is how you could use this video game in a very careful way to plot out even sensitive changes early in life. One of our other design challenges was to build a game that we could record neural activity during gameplay so that we can understand what's going on to lead to higher or lower performance. So this study, we used EEG, but the game can also be played in an MRI scanner. We have some data on that coming out now. So our participants, so this study, I'll show you one other piece of data first. So you could see someone here wearing a 64-channel wired EEG cap. So we could collect data and look at what happens in the game during the most challenging part. That's when a sign comes up and you're also driving. We could time lock a signal to that, and we get this blast of low-frequency activity in the theta range, 4 hertz, from the front part of your brain. Prefrontal cortex, most evolved part of our brain, involved in exactly these types of challenges. So this activity bursts, it peaks over 300 milliseconds, and then decays. It's pretty much gone at the end of a second. And so if we take a look at the brain of 20-year-olds playing the game, this is what we see. So the nose is pointing up, their ears are to the side, and you can see that yellow in the middle, and then going to green, and you can see that's around 3/4 of the way up. We get this burst of activity that just plots exactly with that challenge. If we look at 70-year-olds, we see this. So, there's a peak there. It's not really out of green on the power range. So not engaging this area as rapidly or as strongly as a younger adult. Now, can we take the game, use it in therapeutic mode? And so this was a collaboration actually with Apple at the time. We had laptops that we distributed throughout the Bay Area and had older adults, 60 to 80-year-olds, play the game for 12 hours. So they played it for 1 hour a day, 3 times a week for 4 weeks. We looked at their brain and other cognitive abilities before and then after training. So after we brought them back in the lab, I'll give you a quick picture of what happened to their multitasking performance on the game and also how their brains looked during gameplay. And this is what we see. So really profound improvement on doing something that was incredibly challenging to them over a relatively short time. But what's even more impressive to us is this change in how their brain rapidly engaged within 1/3 of a second after a sign came up while they were driving. If we just look at that performance, the multitasking performance on the game 6 months later, we see that it hasn't even declined significantly, which was shocking to us. We would have done a lot more at the 6-month point, and we are now, knowing that this type of sustainability was possible. Another interesting finding of the study was that Other skills, other cognitive control skills like working memory for faces over short periods of time, and attention span, holding, being vigilant in a very boring, impoverished environment, also significantly improved. And this was an improvement that exceeded that of a no-contact control group, as well as another group that played NeuroRacer, but played it in single tasking mode. So they only did the science task, they only did the driving task, they never did them at the same time. They didn't show these changes. So it was the interference that was induced in gameplay, that was the active ingredient that led to the change on the game and led to these changes in other ability. And then probably what's most exciting to us is that if you look at those that show the biggest change in their brain from pre to post, they show the most transfer of benefits to the other task and the most sustainability of the effects on the game 6 months later. So this is the beginning of a long, future in this type of work to understand what are the design principles that go into building a game to lead to these type of meaningful and sustainable changes. Still a first step, many more things to do. And we're really fortunate, as Daniel mentioned, this was published in Nature in September, and it was the cover of Nature, very, very exciting. You could see that thrilling but totally intimidating title that Nature put on the journal cover of Game Changer, which then tortured me of months explaining to the media that I don't believe it's this game that's a game changer. If there is a game changer here, it's that you can reach out to professionals in an industry like the video game industry and build a customized game that's targeting known deficits in a population, and then do a carefully controlled study over time with neural and behavioral outcome measures to start understanding how we can build new types of therapeutics, right? So it's still the beginning. We need much larger numbers to see real-world transfer and things of that nature. But it's meant to let us know that there's a signal here, and now we can dive further. And how are we diving further? One thing that became very apparent is that you don't build products inside an academic research lab. This is a perfect area to couple academic and industry goals. And so I helped co-found a company called Achille Interactive Labs. I just serve as a science advisor. I keep my day job at UCSF. My friends from LucasArts are now full-time employed over here. Patent filed at UCSF on the algorithm that I described to you, now being licensed by Achille to build a new type of game that uses the core engine but takes it to the next level. And I just want to show you a look at what that is. And I'll talk over this a little bit. There's some music there. But essentially, what you do when you build a game like this is we kept a very high-level game team, kept a lot of scientists, and then tried to keep the basic ingredients, but have the type of emergence and engagement that I think is required in order to lead to the type of changes that we're seeing. How do you do that? Well, if you don't want violence, you can do that through high levels of art and music and story. And you could find that you can impact many different populations with those ingredients. Using things like, the iPad, much more scalable and accessible, and much more user-friendly, especially to people that are not familiar with joysticks. You could see the same type of ingredients here. Both skills have to go up to move and increase your skills. Once you have game designers working full-time, you could create new environments. And actually, unlike NeuroRacer, as you travel through different worlds, the challenges increase. It's still the science task and the driving task, but you could see that they keep layering on to push you further and further. When we test kids, 8 to 12-year-olds, the only thing they want to do is customize their avatar. And so that's an option here. I think it's important for engagement. So anyway, that's what's going on. So that game has been built now. So where is that game? Can you buy it in the App Store as a mask constantly? And you can. So what's happening now is that the company made a very interesting decision to take that game into the medical world completely, cutting it off from the consumer domain, at least for now, and going through large-scale clinical trials, multiple groups. I just advise on these. It's up to my colleagues now to take this the rest of the way. Studies on ADD, depression, TBI. We've heard a lot about TBI, and this type of approach I think is very exciting in general, and of course autism as well. You could see that two of the biggest funders of this type of research, interestingly enough, was Big Pharma. It was sort of a surprise to us. So Shire Pharmaceuticals supporting the ADD study, and Pfizer, which makes Aricept. Shire makes Adderall, by the way. Pfizer makes Aricept supporting the Alzheimer's study. So these, especially the ADD, is about to give birth. These are all in pilot study now, and then go through pivotal studies to try to see, can you get FDA approval for video games in a way that a doctor would be comfortable prescribing it? So maybe we'll be looking at the world's first prescribable video games that can at least complement the pharmaceutical industry, if not reduce doses or replace them if possible. So anyway, that's what's going on now. Pretty exciting, and obviously just the proof is in the pudding. So we'll just have to see what happens as data comes out, and if this doesn't work, then you modify and try again. But that, I think, is the process that we have to do if we want to bring a more multimodal approach to treatments. So now that that game has left the lab, we sort of had like an empty nest syndrome, right? We spent a lot of time with NeuroRacer, and it's better for it to get validated by our colleagues and to reach all those different domains. So what do? Well, we can make new babies and create new games. And I started realizing that we didn't actually have a lab to build and test the types of games that I was coming up with. So at UCSF, I just led the development of a new lab called the Neuroscape Lab, which is really meant to bridge technology and neuroscience as often as possible, using consumer-facing technology and seeing if we can validate it carefully as science and health tools. So this is a glimpse of what it looks like. This is our brand new neuroscience building at the Mission Bay campus at UCSF. So that building, 250,000 square feet, all neuroscience. And you can see our lab in the bottom panels. These two rooms are on opposite sides of the same wall, and one side, the control room, is where we create interactive environments that we then send into the experimental room. Also, we receive pretty much everything we can imagine, from eye movements to body movements to EEG activity to heart rate variability, galvanic skin response. So essentially, we create these immersive environments and then pull out as much data as possible to see how we could change someone on many different levels to improve them and how they function, both healthy and impaired. I just want to show you some of the technology we're excited about. Probably no surprise that we're excited about wireless technology. Our goal is to use the lab as a launching pad to get it into people's homes. So we have a lot of work with tablets. We're building a cognitive assessment called ACE that uses adaptive algorithms to try to get rapid cognitive assessments so that we can start doing experiments mobily and do them on thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. Very excited about sensors, all sorts of sensors. We do a lot of work with hardware companies that are building EEG devices, which we've been using for a long time. And we've just now started finding that we can get really high signal-to-noise reproducibility that we think that we can start doing our neuro experiments in people's homes, follow plasticity over time. Very excited about these two pieces of technology, both virtual reality. You can see here's the Oculus Rift on a guy, that fellow there is Mickey Hart, the percussionist from the Grateful Dead, who works closely with our lab. I'll tell you about what we're doing here in a moment. And then, of course, motion capture. Having people play games with more than their fingers, we think is going to open up new opportunities. So here's a participant in our lab playing a game using the Kinect 2 to drive the gameplay. So let me just take a couple of moments and tell you about some of the new games. None of these are out yet. We've sort of become an R&D lab of sorts now, which is a little bit of an identity crisis for us since we're a research lab. But I promised them that my whole crew that we'll be back as a research lab in 2015, so that's coming up. So we've been building all year. And I just want to give you a glimpse at some of them just so you know the new direction that we're heading in. This is a game I'm massively excited about. I play it pretty much every day now. It's called Body Brain Trainer. And the idea of Body Brain Trainer is to train you both physical fitness and cognitive fitness in an integrated platform, again, bringing in the design elements of adaptivity and feedback. You could take a quick look at it here. Someone's playing it with a cap on. I'll tell you about the brain recording that's going on right there. But what's happening is this person is being challenged to make perceptual decisions, to move between tasks. All their cognitive data is updating the algorithms to challenge them. But you can see that 159 in the corner there, that's their heart rate. We also record the heart rate during gameplay, set it based on a VO2 max beforehand, and we could change the game dynamics in such a way to hold someone's heart rate right at the level that we want to challenge them. So we can challenge them physically and cognitively in this way that merges together. The next study we're excited about is something called rhythmicity. This is sort of inspired by the fact that our brains are rhythmic in every way, from coherence to even isolated. And we know that, for thousands of years, hundreds of cultures have used rhythm as a therapeutic tool. But yet, that really careful study that we really need to do to take someone, make them more rhythmic, and look at what has happened to them hasn't occurred yet. So we have a video game. This is the collaboration with Mickey Hart, and as well as other percussionists. We have several different versions. One takes place in virtual reality. And what we do is we teach you to integrate with rhythms, to synchronize, to syncopate, to reproduce, to create rhythms, train you over time, and then look at what the impact was on the rhythms of your brain and your cognitive abilities. We have another game, Virtual Attention. This game is the earliest, just at the design phase and the concept art. But the idea is to take advantage of something fundamental about virtual reality through all the goggles that are coming out to improve attention. In this case, not focused attention, where everyone has really largely looked at, but distributed attention. How can you throw out your attention more like a net when you want to? Very important for things like driving. We know that this functional field of view contracts as we get older. If we can expand it, we'll think it'll have a lot of benefit. And so that's a new study that we're about to begin. And then this one I think a lot of people are very excited about, not just for its impact on those that are suffering from cognitive impairment, but on healthies as well. It's a game that we call MetaTrain. I designed it based on the principles of concentrated meditation with the game mechanics of feedback and adaptivity. We did a pilot study that was funded by the NIH and got some really nice effects. Now we have a collaborator, Jack Kornfield, who's a leader in meditation, concentrated meditation, and he's been helping guide us. An interesting academic industry collaboration. Zynga, the game company, has been building this game based on sort of the design elements that we presented as a philanthropic venture. So it's really exciting to see an industry like that working closely with our lab to create this. This is just a quick peek of it. The game, we just finished it on Friday, so we're about to begin testing of it too. It's an iPad game. So what we have here is 4 games that are all built to challenge, using the tools and the design principles that we've been building, different aspects of cognition to improve them and understand how we can more powerfully harness plasticity to improve how our brain functions. The biggest win is not going to happen even as these papers start appearing over the next 3 or 4 years, but the real goal is to integrate these together, what I've been calling neuro-CrossFit. What happens if you play them all? How do they interact with each other to enhance you? It's going to take us a long time to get there, to look at interactions between all these. In the meanwhile, I feel like this is a pretty safe area for self-experimentation, so I will be playing all of these games when we finish them in 2015. I don't know what's going to happen. I have really sort of high expectations, but we'll just have to see what happens next year. So that's where we're at now. Now I want to tell you in the remaining time how we can take what we've built, what I just presented to you, and bring it to the next level, right? So that was not really the sort of out there part of our lab. We have another sort of like X teams building some enhancements to that. So first, I would like to say that video games, they're not a magic trick, right? The fact that they work, that we believe that will show that they work over the years, is because they activate circuits, right? That's how the brain works. You interact with an environment in a very specific way, and your brain reacts specifically. And so we get selective neural network activation. But we think that that's just the beginning, right? Once we have a network activated in a selective way, how could we enhance those effects? So 2 things that we're working on are combining our video game play with neuromodulation and neurofeedback. How do we do that? Well, the first thing is that we need better real-time data of what's going on in someone's brain, since a closed loop works with very short latency. So we have some new technology that we've been working on. This is called the glass brain. I'm just going to give you a quick tour of this. This is a collaboration between my lab at UCSF and a group at UCSD, the Swartz Center, as well as NVIDIA, the company that builds the GPU chips. This is a combination of an MRI and an EEG. So the MRI supplies the structural data, the cortex, the golden fibers connecting the different brain areas. We then use that data to guide many different algorithms, source localization to determine, take advantage of the MRI data to help the EEG data that has poor temporal resolution. We do artifact correction, as well as something known as multivariate Granger causality, which is looking at synchrony between 2 areas and also the latency to get these connectivity flows that you see here. We do that all within 200 milliseconds to get real-time recordings. We then take all that data, we bring it into the Unity game engine, where we do all of our other game development, and we create this really beautiful, interactive way of seeing a brain in operation. Now, it's still early days. I really think of this basically as a proof of concept that was done really on discretionary money just to see if we could do it. There's a lot more work to be done, but it starts painting a picture that we can, by working with all these new algorithm development as well as interactive media, start seeing the brain in real time. And this is something that we're going to continue. So what do we do with this? Well, the first is that we could do diagnostics. This is sort of mostly here for fun, but last year I gave the keynote at NVIDIA's GTC conference. The gentleman in the red shirt is Mickey Hart, playing a rhythm drumming game, a predecessor of rhythmicity called Neurodrummer. You could see he has an Oculus Rift on. So Mickey is wearing a 64-channel EEG cap. He's inside virtual reality playing this drumming game. Tim Mullen, one of our head engineers from UCSD, is also wearing an Oculus Rift, but he's flying inside Mickey's brain in real time, so which you could see right over here displayed on this large screen. So it's sort of like a neuro-nested dolls, right? Like Mickey's in virtual reality playing a game and Tim is flying through his brain. Could this, in the future, become a new diagnostic tool, a way of seeing the brain in real time while someone engages with a game that's challenging them appropriately? I don't know. It's something that we're working on. We think it's exciting. But what I'm most enthusiastic about is taking this neural data and using it to drive closed loops. First, I want to point out that we already have closed-loop therapeutics, right? Our video games, as they work right now, something happens in your brain, it guides your behavior, you interact with the game in a certain way. The game responds to that, changes the challenge and the feedback, and feeds back a different environment to then change your brain, right? So we use this closed-loop approach. But if we could record neural activity with a high fidelity in real time, then we could feed that information into the game. So essentially, the game is diagnosing where the weaknesses are and how your brain is processing information, and then using the dynamics to put pressure on those. We think like a gamma knife, we could fine-tune different processes. Again, just under research right now. We also want to use that real-time EEG data to guide neurostimulation right now through DC, but we're also moving into alternating current stimulation, which has been shown to increase the plasticity of the cortex underneath it, and we have data from a lab that's in review right now. So we could feed back the EEG data for stimulation. So let me just put this all together as a close here. So this is where we are right now. 2014, we really have an approach. Again, nothing bad about drugs in general used in this way. We just don't have the selectivity yet. Until we do, what I would like to see happen is our ability to decrease the doses at the least, to decrease side effects, then use targeted video games to activate circuits. The drug selectivity may increase because now the brain is demanding it in a more selective way. We could then use EEG data to guide the gameplay to have more selectivity on those weak processing points in the system. And when necessary, maybe for traumatic brain injury, for example, when you really want to increase plasticity in that area, drive it into a stimulator cap and then feed that back into the brain. And so what you wind up with here is something that's targeted, it's personalized, not just to the individual, but even across time. It's multimodal, and it's multiple closed loops running in parallel. We hope, and this has already started, these are all of my colleagues who find this interesting. Maybe they're largely frustrated with their own ability to impact all of these populations. This is not a theoretical list. Actually, I see a couple that I have not added that I should add now. But over the years, we will see how we can have an impact on strengthening the brain in all of these states, right? So I'm not saying that it's going to cure the underlying pathology of Alzheimer's disease, but having a stronger brain to resist pathology, to improve quality of life during those years until we come up with cures for some of these, I think will have a really big impact. And then, of course, there's education as well. Thank you for your attention.